Since July 13th, 2024, the United States presidential election has been completely turned on its head. On that day, a former president and current presidential candidate was a target of an assassination attempt, the first of its kind since 1981. Fortunately, he survived with minor injuries, but one of his supporters was not so lucky. Just over a week later, on July 21st, the incumbent president, who was seeking a second term, withdrew his candidacy, becoming the first incumbent to not seek re-election since 1968. In this video, I plan to look at both of these historical events in some detail, as well as looking at other similar events in U.S. history. I plan to look at them for the historical significance that they represent, as well as some of the potential ramifications politically. Separating the politics from these inherently political events is impossible. I intend to present a neutral view as much as I can. To start off, I want to look at the attempted assassination of Donald Trump on July 13th. The former president was holding a rally near Butler, Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh. Shortly after beginning to speak, a gunman opened fire on Trump, with the initial shot appearing to have grazed Trump's right ear, just after he had turned his head to look at a video board. This was followed by 7 more shots from the would-be assassin before a Secret Service sniper fired and killed the gunman. In addition to Trump, 2 other rally attendees were injured, while one was killed while shielding his family from the gunfire. Trump was quickly shielded by the Secret Service, and while he was being escorted off the stage, he had what is now an iconic moment in U.S. history.
Hold that in your head, it's bloody.
So we gotta move to the bus. Move to the bus.
Let me get my shit.
Okay, watch you down. Watch you.
Watch out.
Wait.
Trump pumped his fist and chanted the word "fight" to his supporters to show he was alive. The crowd also began to chant USA. An AP press photographer also captured a photo that will likely go down as one of the most recognizable photos in American history. The assassination attempt is the biggest security failure by the Secret Service since the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981, which is also the most recent assassination attempt on a current or former president. Questions were almost immediately raised about how the gunman was allowed onto a rooftop just 150 yards away from Donald Trump. The investigation into the assassination attempt is ongoing. There is no clear motive as to why the perpetrator carried out the attack, and it's not really my place to speculate on it. There is a multifaceted investigation ongoing into what the exact failures were in security that allowed this to take place, and there certainly appears to be many compounding issues at hand. Already, the director of the Secret Service has resigned in the wake of the assassination attempt. As the months go on, we will likely get a more clear picture on what went wrong. Let me know in the comments below if you want me to do a deep dive on the attempted assassination. For now, I want to look at a broader view of the event. In addition, it's important to note that both sides of the political aisle have called for a decrease in the aggressive and oftentimes hateful rhetoric pointed towards one another as well. The attempt on Donald Trump is not the first time a president or former president has been targeted for assassination. He's also unique in that he was the presumptive nominee for president for the Republican Party, one of the 2 main political parties in the United States. Trump is seeking to become just the second person in U.S. history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms as president, meaning he was not only a former president, but a current presidential candidate as well. It is not the first time a presidential candidate has been the target of assassination attempts. Some notable examples include Alabama Governor George Wallace, who was seeking a Democratic nomination for president in 1972 when he was shot in Laurel, Maryland. He survived, but he was left paralyzed from the waist down. In 1968, Robert F. Kennedy, the brother of late President John F. Kennedy, was seeking the Democratic nomination for president when he was shot by Sirhan Sirhan and died just hours after winning the California primary. Another notable attempt was made on former President Teddy Roosevelt who was running for a non-consecutive second term, much like Donald Trump, as a third-party candidate for president. Roosevelt was leaving a hotel en route to giving a speech at a nearby location when a gunman shot him in the chest. The bullet traveled through Roosevelt's 50-page speech as well as his steel glasses case before lodging in his chest. Famously, Roosevelt continued to the venue and gave his speech and remarked that it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. Just 2 days after the assassination attempt of Donald Trump, the Republican National Convention began, where Trump was formally nominated for president. On the fourth and final day of the convention, Trump delivered a 90-minute acceptance speech, which began with him recounting the attempt on his life, as well as honoring the man killed in the attack and the 2 supporters who were wounded in an incredibly unique moment in U.S. history. What effects this will have on the November election will remain unknown until election night, especially considering the monumental event that took place just over a week later concerning Trump's presumed opponent, incumbent President Joe Biden. In the 2020 presidential election, former Vice President Joe Biden defeated incumbent President Donald Trump. Coming into 2024, both Trump and Biden had made clear their intentions to run again in 2024. President Biden, being eligible to seek a second term, had no serious opposition in Democratic primaries, winning all but one contest handily and becoming the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party, while his 2020 opponent, Donald Trump, swept the Republican primaries handily as well, setting up a rematch of the 2020 election. With both presumptive nominees having been determined so quickly and early into the election campaign season, both Trump and Biden agreed to a debate to be held on June 27th. This is incredibly early for a presidential debate to be held, considering that neither party had formally nominated Biden or Trump, and that the respective nominating conventions were almost a month away for the Republicans and nearly 2 months away for the Democrats. Most presidential debates are held late in the campaign season, generally in late September and throughout October in the run-up to the November election. On the night of the debate, approximately 51 million people tuned in. The debate was an unmitigated disaster for President Biden, who provided incoherent answers as well as misspeaking multiple times throughout. In addition, he appeared to stare off into the distance or look generally confused. Former President Trump did not have a particularly notable performance, but President Biden's awful showing led to questions about his fitness for office, questions that plagued him since he ran in 2020. In addition, President Biden's poll numbers began slipping drastically compared to Trump, leading to fears among Democrats that he would lose the election and lose badly. This led to Democratic congressmen and other leaders to begin calling on Biden to withdraw from the race and allow a different candidate to represent the Democratic Party. The following month saw these calls grow as the list of lawmakers and leaders calling for him to step down increased drastically. On July 21st, in a nearly unprecedented move, President Biden announced his intention to withdraw his candidacy for the presidency in a letter posted to Twitter. Around 30 minutes later, he announced his endorsement of his Vice President Kamala Harris for the Democratic nomination for president. Within days, Vice President Harris had garnered enough support from the Democratic Party and their leaders, and from delegates originally pledged to President Biden in order to become the presumptive Democratic nominee. If elected, Harris would be the first female president in U.S. history, as well as the first South Asian and second African American to become president. President Biden then had a televised address to the nation announcing his intention to continue to pursue his agenda in the last 6 months of his term, as well as portraying a unifying message. Many have portrayed President Biden's decision to not seek a second term as selfless and putting country above self. Personally, I believe the truth is far more cutthroat and political. Biden's sagging poll numbers led to dozens of Democratic lawmakers publicly calling for him to step down as a Democratic nominee, while even more pressured him behind closed doors. In addition, I think it's likely that major donors for the Democratic Party threatened to pull funding not only from his campaign, but also from Democratic candidates in tight races throughout the country. In addition, Biden's legacy was very much at risk, since a major defeat to Donald Trump would tarnish any positives from his presidency, most notably defeating Trump himself in 2020. Ultimately, I think President Biden was left with little choice but to withdraw based on these internal pressures. But he was allowed to save face by making it appear as though it was entirely his decision, as well as allowing him to secure a legacy that so far is being portrayed as selfless and noble by putting country above self, even if the truth is a little darker than that. President Biden's decision to withdraw from the 2024 presidential election while still eligible for a second term is nearly unprecedented. President Lyndon B. Johnson announced he would not seek a second term as president after a poor showing in a New Hampshire primary on March 31, 1968.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Johnson had sagging popularity due to the Vietnam War and saw challenges in the form of Robert F. Kennedy and others. Johnson's vice president, Hubert Humphrey, would ultimately become the Democratic nominee and would receive Johnson's endorsement in September of that year. Humphrey would go on to be defeated by Richard Nixon in the general election. Many presidents had declined to seek third terms prior to the passage of the 22nd Amendment in 1951, which limited the presidency to 2 terms. This was largely due to the tradition established by George Washington, who had only sought 2 terms as America's first president. Several other presidents have declined to seek election to full second terms aside from Biden and Johnson. This includes Harry Truman, Calvin Coolidge, Teddy Roosevelt, James Buchanan, and James Polk. These men had various reasons for not seeking second terms, whether it was due to sagging poll numbers, feeling they had accomplished their goals, or promises to only serve a single term. In the case of Truman, Coolidge, and Roosevelt, they had served nearly 2 full terms worth of years in office due to the death of their predecessor, which led to their ascendancy to the presidency in the first place. Others have sought second terms, but failed to be nominated by their party, and therefore unwillingly were forced to not seek re-election. This makes President Biden's decision extremely unique, especially considering that Biden had already earned the right to seek a second term by virtue of sweeping the Democratic primaries. With Vice President Harris now likely to be the Democratic Party nominee, the 2024 U.S. presidential election has been completely flipped on its head in the span of just a few weeks. At the beginning of June, it seemed all but guaranteed that we were facing a rematch of the 2020 presidential election that would see a 78 and 81-year-old candidates face off yet again. The mood in the United States seemed almost resigned to these choices, regardless of which candidate you supported. For Democrats, this feeling of resignation seemed to get even worse after President Biden's debate performance on June 27th. But that all changed with Biden's announcement of his withdrawal from the 2024 presidential race and subsequent endorsement of Vice President Harris. The Democratic Party has been re-energized, but there's a long way to go to really say what the results of this election will be. In addition, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump has in a similar sense re-energized his base to come out in support of him. These last few weeks have been some of the most monumental and unusual in U.S. political history. Now, if there's anything in this video you'd like me to go over in a bit more detail, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.